Okay. On the debt ceiling debate, your response on whether you would vote against the deal was not tepid.
No.
It was not just no, it was hell no. And I commend you for not waffling or for not obscuring your position. Some of the other positions taken in this race might not have been as clear as yours. Yours was clear from the very first line. You know that the result of the debt ceiling debate was that Standard & Poor's downgraded the country's debt rating to AA+. Huge crisis. But if you read the text behind the decision, they seem to put the responsibility for the downgrade on members of Congress, both sides, for not being serious enough in their attempts to solve the problem. Do you not believe that that this debate is ultimately responsible for the crisis that we have right now? I mean, for the debt ceiling crisis. Or do you disagree with Standard & Poor's logic that the rationale for the downgrade should be something else?
Look, there's no doubt that the lousy debt deal was a very significant cause of the downgrade. It's part of the reason I opposed it.
Yeah.
It was a deal that didn't solve the problem. And the reason it didn't solve the problem is President Barack Obama and the Democrats in Congress were adamantly opposed to any real spending cuts. And at the same time, look, I mean, I'm not just throwing rocks at one party. The people driving that spending train have been the Democrats, but many of the people sitting in the passenger seat smiling along have been squishy Republicans in Washington. A huge part of the problem with what we have in Washington is an awful lot of establishment Republicans who have been utterly complicit in this explosion of federal government spending. And the problem is that there are a lot of Republicans that view the highest goal as compromise. And the way a Democrat and a Republican compromise in Washington is I agree to spend for your project and you agree to spend for my project. And the person that loses is the taxpayers who get robbed collectively by a bipartisan coalition.
By what definition was this debt deal a compromise? The one that you opposed. How was it a compromise? What did the Republicans give up?
They raised the debt ceiling.
Which they had done 17 times during the Bush administration without incident. How is that a compromise?
Because we're at a crisis point. The debt ceiling is a mechanism to have a debate about the level of spending, and we are at a crisis point. We are approaching 100% of our GDP being our national debt. Now look, that's on a path. You don't have to look far. Look at Europe. Look at Greece. If we keep having politicians that spend 40% more than they take in, it will destroy our nation. It will bankrupt our nation. Now, I believe with all of my heart that will not happen because Americans care about freedom. The Tea Party movement is a result of millions of Americans saying, stop these clowns in Washington.
But if everybody had voted no, as you did, because they found the deal to be insufficient, and we had defaulted, would you say that would have been a disaster? Would you believe that the default threat was false? What do you think would have happened?
I think the premise of your question is false.
Go.
President Obama recklessly and deliberately threatened a default. In my opinion, and that was a deliberate tactic to use it as scaremongering. In my opinion, any responsible president at the start of the debt ceiling debate would have said the following: under no circumstances will the United States of America ever default on its debt. Period. Whatever happens in the debt ceiling, we will not default in our debt. Federal government revenues are approximately $200 billion a month. Service on the debt is approximately $20 billion a month. There are ample revenues to meet the debt obligations regardless of what happens on the debt.
So it was a phony threat.
It was and it was a deliberate phony threat because what the president and the Democrats wanted to do is scare people that a financial apocalypse would happen, the markets would melt down, the economy would melt down. And, you know, Senator Pat Toomey introduced legislation that would require, in the event of a debt ceiling and a government shutdown, that the debt always be met so that there is never a default. And the Democrats said absolutely not, because we want to play brinksmanship. We want to scare people and threaten a default. That was grossly irresponsible on the other side. Now, what would have happened if the debt ceiling hadn't been erased? That would have been significant. 40 cents of every dollar we spend is borrowed. It would have been essentially like another government shutdown. 40% of federal government spending would have stopped until the issue was resolved. Now, that's not a long-term solution, but it's not catastrophic.
You know,
I was
yeah.
living in Washington in 1995. I was actually clerking for the federal court, getting ready to clerk for Chief Justice Rehnquist during the last government shutdown. And I remember one of the funnier things, the Department of Commerce, 70% of the employees didn't come to work. And they put out press releases that said, "Fear not, 100% of the essential services of the department are being taken care of." And I remember laughing, going, well, what a great indictment. Apparently 70% of these people are not needed.
Lay these people off, right?
If it does everything it needs to do without them.
30%, right, yeah.
That says an awful lot.
The cynics will say, Mr. Cruz, that the Republican Party is playing politics here, and they didn't want a really good debt ceiling deal, an ambitious one, just as they don't want a jobs plan to pass, simply because they're looking ahead to 2012, and anything that they agree to that ultimately helps the president does more to help his reelection. So it's in your interest and the party's interest to thwart him so that he is in a worse position for reelection. What do you say about that?
What I say is that any principled member of Congress puts protecting the interest of the United States first. On the debt ceiling debate, I was the second Senate candidate in the country to sign the cut, cap, and balance pledge. And I was very clear in what circumstances I would have voted for it.
Yep.
Now, that's not playing politics. That's not hiding anything. Now, it happened to be an outcome that was not consistent with the policy objectives of the president.
Right.
The policy objectives of the president are wrong, are hurting the country, and are destroying jobs.
This is on principle, not politics.
This is absolutely on principle.